Hi.
Hi.
So my first question, it says on your Twitter that you're Jewish. Am I getting this right?
No.
Is it the right Twitter?
On my Twitter bio, it says I'm Jewish?
No, but like in your tweets. I don't want to be wrong.
I have Jewish background. I'm just trying to think of.
Okay, so as someone with a Jewish background,
Yes.
how do you feel about Bernie's plan for Israel, especially as someone concerned with foreign policy?
I love it. It's an absolutely necessary. My Jewish values teach me to oppose apartheid.
All right. My name is Ben Burgess. This is Give Them an Argument. In a little while, we are going to be joined by Nora Barrows-Friedman, associate editor from the Electronic Intifada, to talk about everything that's been going on in Palestine, which is also, of course, the subject of the clip that we just watched from our late brother Michael Brooks. Which comes from his absolutely fantastic Mill series lecture that he did, just before everything shut down for the pandemic. And I think that was a perfect response to that question. And I actually will just say real briefly that I just had an article out in Jacobin. It just came out a couple days ago. That overlapped with the subject matter there. So the title of the article is Israel doesn't have a, quote, right to exist, but Israelis and Palestinians do. And the point of the article was to push back against something that I hear a lot, because if you think about everything that's going on, as right now, as the Netanyahu government is like indiscriminately bombing Palestinians in Gaza, has intentionally bombed buildings where media organizations are headquartered, and the idea of an independent Palestinian state seems more remote and fantastical than ever. And the obvious alternative solution to doing that, since of course this Palestinian state would supposedly be in all of West Bank and all of Gaza, if we want to really go way out beyond the limits of what you can easily imagine. Let's also call it like the parts of East Jerusalem that were annexed by Israel after 1967. Not that I think that would happen in a scenario like this. All of that put together is about 22% of the country as a whole, the total territory of Israel-Palestine. That would involve people, the residents of the West Bank, which is this insanely overcrowded, okay, the West Bank is one thing, but the Gaza Strip is this insanely overcrowded literal strip of land. It's about 140 square miles. So to put that into context, Kent County, Michigan, which is where Grand Rapids is, which is where I went to undergrad, I do not consider it to be a bustling metropolis. It's about 840 square miles. So 140 square miles for the Gaza Strip is one of the most insanely overcrowded areas on the planet. It's full of refugees from the rest of Israel-Palestine. And people in any sort of two-state solution, well, the Gaza Strip and the West Bank are not geographically continuous. So anybody in this 140-mile square strip of land who wanted to travel to the rest of any other part of their country from there would have to have permission to travel through the territory of a hostile military power, which is permission that could be taken away at any time. We also realistically, if some factions didn't accept, the peace deal that created this, which they would not. I mean, look at even something like Northern Ireland and the Good Friday agreements and the IRA splinter groups that didn't accept that. The way things have started to look worrying again there. So there would absolutely be factions there that did not accept this deal. If any of them launched attacks, I think that we know perfectly well, look at what's happened in Lebanon since the Israeli occupation ended there, that the response would be collective punishment, sending in the bombers. This is a recipe for having the conflict go on and on and on. So And of course, all of this, even this scenario, is a fantasy because it assumes that you would have a Palestinian state in the entire territory that goes beyond Israel's pre-1967 borders. But realistically, in any sort of negotiated process like this, even that wouldn't happen because since 1967, Israel has been building cities full of its own citizens on the West Bank, many of which have been legally recognized for decades, are for every purpose considered part of Israel. Citizens who live there are considered to live at home, not abroad. And I think the idea that all of these would be evacuated completely is kind of fantastical. The past precedents that people bring up about settlements in the Gaza Strip or the Sinai Peninsula, we're talking about nothing remotely comparable in terms of the number of people or how long they've been there, how well established they were. I think that would be like a civil war to evacuate all of those people. So realistically, any sort of two-state deal, if it ever actually happened, we're getting close to 20, well, we're more than well over 20 years since the Madrid Peace Conference at this point. So assuming that there was a two-state deal at the end of this rainbow, that would be not just this Gaza Strip canton that you couldn't travel to the rest of Palestine from without going through Israeli territory. This would realistically be cantons even on the West Bank, geographically disconnected, crisscrossed with Israeli settlements and Israeli roads. This is no kind of solution at all. So when you say, hey, how about the obvious alternative, which is to say that for every legal purpose but one, these territories were incorporated into Israel anyway, so let's take care of the one and give full, equal legal and political rights, Israeli citizenship, the right to vote to everybody who lives in the West Bank and Gaza, and then dismantle all of the laws and institutions in Israel that discriminate against citizens or make distinctions on the basis of ethnic or religious communities. And that, of course, gets you what's known as the one-state solution, which a lot of people will tell you is a terrible thing. Say, you can't have this because Israel has a right to exist. And what I point out in the article is that this idea that a particular nation state has a right to exist that would be violated if it were absorbed into a larger one or divided into smaller ones doesn't really make sense even on its own terms. It's a very strange idea historically. Did Czechoslovakia have a right to exist? Did the Confederacy have the right to exist? Did the Kingdom of Two Sicilies have a right to exist? Nobody really thinks so. Nation states come and go all the time when one particular way of drawing borders or dividing up the world into nations doesn't work for long enough for enough of the people who are covered. Oftentimes, those national configurations are renegotiated, peacefully or otherwise. This has happened many, many, many times throughout history. And the idea that it's always unjust when it happens because nations have a right to exist is just very strange on its own terms. And like I say in the article, I think the issue is really clarified because, come on, nobody is going to militarily conquer any Israeli territory. This is by far, by a mile, the regional military superpower. So really, I think the issue is clarified when people append to Israel has a right to exist. They append this phrase as a Jewish state. They say Israel has a right to exist as a Jewish state. And what I say about this, in the article, is that the idea that Israel has a right to exist as a Jewish state, well, what does that mean? Well, it's fine for Israel to have a Jewish majority, just as it's fine for the United States to have a white Christian majority. But if an American friend told me they thought it was very important that America always have a white Christian majority, and that, for example, our immigration policy should guarantee that black and brown people never became a majority, I would probably call them a fascist. And I don't really see a different reason in principle to see these two situations as being fundamentally different. The idea that a nation has a right to permanently maintain its current racial or ethnic or religious majority, even if doing so tramples on the right to others, violates basic democratic principles that anybody, basically to the left of, I don't even know, to the left of Viktor Orban, to the left of ISIS, would take for granted in every other possible circumstance. I don't see a reason to make an exception here. So, like I say in the article, Israel, in that military sort of sense, isn't going anywhere. The nation state will exist in some form, but apartheid, which is what we're really talking about, could cease to exist there, and it damn well should. All right, Rant Over. I'm joined as always by our producer, Forrest Miller. So, Forrest, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're gonna watch this in the post game for patrons. A little plug there, I guess. But Michael, a couple years ago, I didn't feel like it felt like the two-state solution was the only solution that we were ever really conceivably given. And Michael had Jeff Halper on, who's recently written about this, and he had him on, and there's like a 5-minute clip of him explaining all the benefits of a one-state solution, and that seems like a much more like a democratized Israel seems like a much more which it's not democratized now, obviously completely, but there's a whole bunch of different ethnic groups living inside of Israel, and throughout history.
Which is a really important point, because sometimes you'll see people saying, I mean, I say this with love. I think everybody knows how much I love David Feldman, but like we were arguing about this on the show, and he was kind of running this line about how you really expect these populations that are bitter enemies to live together in peace. There are already tons of Palestinians who live inside Israel proper, and they go, like, right now, lately there have been some really ugly pogroms against them, within Israel, but for the most part they do in fact live in peace with their Jewish neighbors and other
and have for a really long time. I mean,
very long time, since the foundation of Israel.
Before
that, but I mean, certainly throughout the entire time Israel has existed as a state.
So the idea that ideologically speaking, and Zionism itself is an ideology, you know what I mean? Like it's a political goal. So right. The idea that that can't happen if that political goal is kind of taken away is I mean, it's ridiculous to think that that a democratized state couldn't exist there. So I think that that's kind of my thought on it, and I don't know. I'll be interested to see what patrons think of revisiting that Michael clip later on.
Yeah, no, for sure. But in just a few minutes, we are going to bring on our first guest. But before Nora comes on, there are a couple things that we need to do first. So I guess first things first. Let's watch the preview for this week's episode, Thursday episode for patrons, which is an interview with Nick Manley about like chess and the Cold War, which is a subject that was like he kind of had to sell me on a little bit, to do this, but I'm glad that we did. It was a really interesting conversation. So let's watch that, come back, hit a few more things, and then let's bring Nora on. All right, I am now joined by Nick Manley, who is a returning guest. He was on not a episode because I don't think we put it on the podcast feed, but he was on the YouTube channel before last year to debate me about whether there's anything valuable or sort of worthwhile in the philosophy of Ayn Rand. And Nick is somebody who I've known, at least in an online way, for a long time, and we've always had friendly and informative debates about stuff like that. But Nick is also, quite apart from his political or philosophical views, he definitely the person I know who knows the most about chess, and that's also a context I've interacted with him in. He's I suck at it, but he's tried to make me better. So in any case, and he had this idea a while back, for an episode where we talk about the history of Soviet chess, and I have to admit, like at first, I didn't. I think maybe my first reaction was, well, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure, I find Russian history as interesting as anybody does, but I mean, as far as like sort of political, relevance to what we do here, I mean, I'm not a tanky. My first reaction to most mentions of the Soviet Union is nothing to do with us, right? That's not what it's not what I mean by socialism. But actually, the more I thought about it, the more I thought this would be interesting, and it actually kind of reminded me of a passage in an essay that I read many years ago by Leon Trotsky during the Russian Civil War, where Trotsky is responding to people who said, well, it's bad to have like a sort of consolidated army that would fight the war in a usual way, because as a new like worker state, it should have its own form of organization. And he said, well, no, this is confused. The way the laws of war don't vary based on the social character of the combatants. Of course, you could write a whole history of class societies, of feudalism and capitalism and stuff by talking about military history and how armies worked. But he said that doesn't mean there's like a specifically like proletarian or socialist way to organize an army. And then his analogy at the end of the passage was you could also write a history of the world and class societies in terms of chess, but that doesn't mean there's a specifically socialist way to play chess. And that I think made me think, the more I thought about this, actually might be an interesting little window into thinking about the Soviet Union, the Cold War, and anyway, it's interesting history in itself. So thank you for coming back, Nick.
Yeah, I'm glad to be back. And so feel free to interject at any point. I wrote down some notes, and I have some stuff in my memory that I'm counting on using. But I mean, to start with, there was chess. There was a chess world and a community in Russia before the Bolshevik Revolution and before the existence of the Soviet Union. And in fact, Tsar Nicholas II crowned the first 5 players, I think in St. Petersburg, although people might want to Google that, in 1914 or something. The title Grandmaster originates from the Tsar giving that to 5, bestowing it on 5 world-class players. There might even been a tournament or something going on. So Russia was already figuring in chess history before the Bolsheviks and Lenin carried out their revolution. So some of the names would be, and sometimes it's spelled with a T and sometimes spelled with a C. And I don't always have the greatest pronunciation, but it's like Tigorin or Chigorin. This book right here, that's the guy I'm thinking of. So in case anyone wants to see the spelling. And there was a Russian player who came from a landowning father, and according to Soltis, he had a landowning father, and I'm almost directly quoting him, in a textile heiress for a mother. I'm pretty much directly quoting him or him. And his father was a member of the Duma, and he was of aristocratic background. And Alexander Alekseev was the 4th world champion and one of the top players of all time. And he was playing in Russia and developing in Russia before the Bolshevik Revolution. And part of what I'll talk about is how that changed things for him, given his class background and what he had to navigate in terms of the 40s and the post-Tsar situation in terms of the Civil War and the greater suspiciousness and fear. And the suspiciousness, obviously not completely unfounded, that some people who had lost their status and stuff would fight to keep their class privilege and keep their class status, like the white armies. So so that kind of gives like a historical background to it. And so the Bolsheviks, they inherit a chess world that's been shaped, I guess, put it in Marxist terms, by feudalism and capitalism. And according to Wikipedia, which I've been told is as accurate as there's a study that's as accurate as the Encyclopedia Britannica. Before the Bolshevik Revolution, chess and chess culture was predominantly, as any Marxist might figure, a bourgeoisie or a like landed nobility kind of thing. So the Bolsheviks,
leisure time, right?
Yeah, the people who had the leisure time, and in other words, to play chess. And the Bolsheviks, I don't know all the nitty gritty details. I know they set up an authority to oversee sports in general, and they did take over chess fell under that, became a community that they sought to direct or that they sought to regulate and direct and subsidize, like a lot of areas of life. But what I found really interesting is there's a quote in Andrew Soltis's Soviet Chess, and I forget the page number, 1917 to 1991, which is like a really classic history. It also has over 200 games with annotations, some of which never been before published in the West. But there's a quote from a Soviet official, I think it's near the beginning in the 1920s, saying that they don't aim to create like an individual who's going to like triumph like Bobby Fischer did for the American World Chess Championship. They, you know, their aim is to like bring chess to the masses, or chess it's a radically egalitarian aim of chess being a mass phenomenon and chess culture being available, not this one individual that stands out and conquers the World Chess Championship, which raises an interesting question, because as Soltis notes, and it reaches its golden era in the 1950s, where the Soviets are really, really dominating international chess. They still held the World Chess Championship after Alekseev's death, and the Hague-Moscow tournament, where they had a bunch of top class players play for the World Championship. And Alekseev was Russian, but he might have left the USSR by this point. But in 1948, they held a tournament at The Hague because he unexpectedly died. And I think it's been said he died slumped over a chessboard, actually. That's where they found him. And Mikhail Botovic won that tournament. And he's a Soviet grandmaster. And so after that, I guess in 1948 until 1972 with Bobby Fischer, the Soviet players, their elite in ability and such are basically trading the world title between themselves.
Yeah.
And so a lot of I guess you could call it nationalist and geopolitical pride gets invested in that. And unlike in the US, chess, with the state subsidization and the celebrity status of these grandmasters, becomes a national kind of like a national sport.
Yeah, so it was an interesting discussion. Talked a little bit about how it played out in Cold War politics, and with like the KGB and the CIA both sending like minders to like chess tournaments to see who people were interacting with, as like Americans were interacting with people in the Soviet Union and vice versa, and kind of the larger question about how it plays out. Like to the extent like that you could explain the Soviet chess dominance during the Cold War. It might just be cultural, but you could also say that maybe it's a society that had a lot more educational resources extended to a lot more of the population, was at least more egalitarian in some ways. That more people had the chance to do things like that, or conversely, that in under Stalinism, it was a sort of safe thing for intellectuals to do that didn't really threaten anyone. So interesting discussion going to come out for patrons on Thursday. But meanwhile, just want to before we bring Nora on, the only other thing I wanted to do was to talk for just a minute about some personal news that is relevant to the show. Which is that a couple weeks ago, just made a big decision and a big leap, which is that, for the last couple of years, I've had a full-time job at Georgia State University, Perimeter College, which is not the sort of job that you might think of when you hear, philosophy professor. Trust me, guys, you have no idea how much of a neoliberalized hellscape academia is right now. You sort of imagine everything, like a lot of people who aren't in it imagine everything as like guys in like tweed jackets walking around ivy covered grounds and having tons of time to do research and stuff. This is like no job security whatsoever, renewable year by year. Any year the budget was tight, the position could have been cut. 7 classes a semester, so no time built in really to do anything else. And with everything else that I've been doing, this show, writing for Jacobin and book writing, speaking, doing things like driving to Florida to do that debate, the juggling all of those commitments had just gotten untenable, and it had even gotten untenable while we were still teaching online because of the pandemic. This fall, when we were going back in person, it became it was going to get to the point where something was very quickly going to have to give, and it really goes against the grain to give up a sort of reliable job with some approximation of a lower middle class salary in favor of a bunch of writing and podcasting gigs that collectively pay a fraction of that. But it's something, I got to the point where I really couldn't do both. This is the work that's most meaningful to me. So a couple of weeks ago, I told my department chair that I did not want to renew my contract there. So this is it, guys. This is my full-time job now. So if I hadn't mentioned becoming a patron, you get to listen to the rest of that episode with Nick. You get that extra episode every single Thursday. You get the group voice chat, Discord office hours. You get access to that Discord, that kind of discussion forum. We've also been doing monthly Discord movie nights. And of course, there are also the monthly Sopranos recap bonus episodes with Nando and Waz and Mike Racine. So a lot of gestures of appreciation there. But basically, it's solidarity. If you like the work that we do here and want to keep it up and want me and Forrest to make rent, do consider doing that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and keep a roof over my head.
Keep a roof over Forrest's head.
Yeah.
Keep a roof over my head.
I'm gonna have to watch Jordan Peterson clips outside for the show, and it's not gonna help anybody.
Yeah, exactly. Let's. I know we were going to lead into it with the clip, but let's actually hold off for just a minute on the clip and bring Nora on. Nora Barrows-Friedman is the associate editor at the Electronic Intifada, and of course is here to talk to us about some very fun and light subjects. But we appreciate her coming on. Thank you, Nora.
Thanks, guys. This is a long-time listener, first-time caller. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. So yeah, let's Forrest, do you want to stick that first clip on?
Jacob the Settler.
Jacob, you know this is not your house.
Yes, but if I go, you don't go back. So what's the problem? What are you yelling at me? I didn't do this.
But
it's easy to yell at me, but I didn't do this.
You are stealing my house.
And if I don't steal it, you don't steal it.
No one is allowed to steal it, يا عمي.
זה לא שלי להחזיר. בוא נגיד שזה יש. זה לא שלי.
All right, tell me what we just watched.
Yeah, it's a viral clip from about a week and a half ago where obviously you see a woman in the Palestinian neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah in occupied East Jerusalem, telling the settler, who she knows by name because he comes around like all the settlers do in that area and elsewhere all across Palestine, trying to kick Palestinians out of their house. So you see, Jacob the settler, Jacob, who's got a pretty good American accent there because he's American. Basically just, I mean, it's like a very brief encapsulation of the entire Zionist ideology, right? Like, I didn't do this. Okay, Jacob, you didn't, but the state behind you and the courts and the police and the military behind you and 73 years of this, yeah, they did it. So yes, okay, you didn't do this, but also, if I don't do it, then someone else will.
Yeah. That's
just like complete American entitlement, settler colonial, mindset. She goes like, yummy. That means like dude. basically in Arabic. She's like, dude, you can't steal my house. No one's going to steal my, complete insanity. So that was, yeah, as I said, like a week and a half ago, as Palestinians have been trying to resist, Israeli expulsion from their houses.
Yeah. So what's the mechanism that they're using to take these people out of their houses? How does this work?
So, like all expulsions of Palestinians since 1947, Israel uses their laws that they write. That gives them the right to expel any Palestinians home that they want, or land. Any sort of property that belongs to Palestinians, it's basically fair game for Israel. This is part of the Zionist political ideology that you were talking about. And so in this case, the settlers and these organizations that back them, these various settler organizations that are financed by Americans and Canadians and Europeans, they petition the Israeli courts. They say that this land does not belong to these Palestinians. A lot of the time, especially in places like Sheikh Jarrah, the documents that settlers provide the courts are completely falsified. They're fabricated. But it doesn't matter because the courts are on their side. The Israeli legal system is set up to favor Israeli settler colonization. The Palestinians don't have. Yeah,
it's worth highlighting here that even in the cases where the documents might not be forged, that there is like a really outrageous institutionalized legal discrimination here, because if you say okay, I am scion of a Jewish family that was kicked out by the Jordanians in 1948, so here's an old deed to this house, so I get to kick out the people who were born there in that house, but other way around, most definitely not allowed.
No, I mean, just across the street in what's now West Jerusalem, many of these families, they can see their houses that they can't access anymore because Jewish Zionist settlers came and took them over, and there's no recourse for Palestinians going to the Israeli court to say, give me back my house. It would collapse the entire state project, which is precisely why Israel won't let Palestinians there, even access the courts, let alone the 7 million refugees now, who are not even allowed to visit Palestine.
Yeah. I mean, all these people who might have like a deed or like a key to the house that have been passed down since since the 1940s. Right. They certainly can't. They certainly don't have recourse to the same thing. No. Which is I think something that's worth highlighting, because I think maybe some Americans who only sort of pay attention to this kind of have like a blurry watercolor impression of what's going on. Sort of think, okay, so obviously there are these, territories that were occupied in 1967, and I can see why that's bad. And there's also okay, maybe when the state was first founded, there's this ethnic cleansing. I can see why that's bad, right? But they sort of think that that's it, right? I mean, those are the sort of two issues that put together make up the Palestinian complaint. And one of the things that leaves out is the fact that within the Green Line, within Israel proper, it's not even like you might say of many nations where there's some sort of ethnic majority minority underclass situation where you might say, okay, there are various disparities, there are various informal ways that people are being discriminated against. No, I mean, in this case, it's really institutionalized and really
completely. I mean, for Palestinian citizens of the state of Israel, those who are inside the Green Line, they are subjected to more than 60 laws on the books that legally discriminate against them in terms of housing and social services and infrastructure and education. It is, I mean, it's legalized discrimination, and that's why it is a very apt word to use the word apartheid, as Human Rights Watch, as B'Tselem, as Palestinian human rights organizations for the last 70 years have called it. It is institutionalized, it is legalized discrimination. And then you have the Palestinians in the occupied West Bank and Gaza Strip, who have no rights at all when it comes to, Israel. I mean, they can't even access Israeli courts. The people in the West Bank are subjected to Israeli military courts, while their neighbors in the settlements they're Israeli citizens. They get all the social services, and they go to Israeli civilian courts. So you have two sets of laws for two populations. Under any other circumstance, this would be clear apartheid, and it would be condemned by the international community. But because it's Israel,
Right.
It gets an exception.
Yeah. So I want to dig into this, because I don't want anybody to be able to like watch this or listen to it and think, okay, I heard some like, vague claims, but like maybe this is overheated or whatever.
Mm.
Like you give me some examples of those of some of the things that those 60 laws that you're talking about. So for people who are like, so for Palestinians who who are actually citizens of Israel, like which by the way, I mean, just to give people a very small sense of this, because like sometimes it really seems like weirdly backwards, like I like in the way it's portrayed in U.S. discourse. Like even when people like have good politics and they're trying to say something good, like it still feels kind of through the looking glass, because they'll say things like, in trying to show how legitimate, how the complaint is, right? They'll say, they'll make these comparisons like Black Lives Matter and things like that. But like, for example, it wasn't the case that as recently as the 1990s in the United States that Americans were all forced to carry around ID cards that said whether they were white or black, to make sure that no light-skinned black people could pass. And that is exactly, I mean, my understanding is that they sort of changed that part of the ID card, but like it's a little muddy. But like, for the overwhelming majority of the history of the state of Israel, again, certainly as relevant recently as the 90s, early 2000s, everybody's mandatory ID card said, whether they were Jewish or Arab on it. Yeah. Which is the sort of thing that you really don't get a lot of in multicultural democracies.
No, as you were talking about before I came on, Israel is a democratic state if you're white and Jewish.
Right.
Fine, you can have total democracy. If you're not Jewish, if you're not white, even, because a lot of discrimination happens against Mizrahi, Arab Jews, Ethiopian Jews. Right. You can't have a religious, ethnocentric state and call it a democracy. Like, you can have one or the other. You cannot have both. You cannot have both. It's not a Jewish democratic state. It is an apartheid settler colonial ideological state. So when we talk about the discriminatory laws, so I'm reading from this wonderful organization, Adallah, which is based in Haifa. And they're an organization for Palestine, kind of like a rights organization for Palestinian citizens of Israel. I'm just going to read a little bit because there's so many. So there are over 65 Israeli laws that discriminate directly or indirectly against Palestinian citizens in Israel and or Palestinian residents of the occupied Palestinian territory on the basis of their national belonging. The discrimination in these laws is either explicit, discrimination on its face, or more often the laws are worded in a seemingly neutral manner, but have or will likely have a disparate impact on Palestinians in their implementation. So then they go on to say they limit the rights of Palestinians in all areas of life, from citizenship rights to the right to political participation, land and housing rights, education rights, cultural and language rights, religious rights, and due process rights during detention. Some of the laws also discriminate against other groups such as gays, non-religious Jews, and Palestinian refugees. So, I mean, I can put this in the chat, and you can read all of the 65 laws.
Yeah. So, so housing.
Yeah.
So for example, I know that there's something. There's, for example, the Jewish National Fund, which is like a quasi-state organization that that is used to buy land, and that's explicitly discriminatory,
Just
right?
for Jews. Yep.
Just purely for Jews.
Yeah.
To my great shame, I can remember like being like a teenager and like seeing like the little thing to put in
the
like
FedEx boxes. Yeah, of course.
And like putting it in. Like, oh, that sounds like
plant a tree in Israel, right? I mean, they used that money to really, and other money from governments, to plant. I mean, they're correct about it. They planted trees. They're not in Israel, and they used the tree planting to literally cover up the foundations of the villages and towns that were demolished in 1947 and 1948, and then again in 1967. And then they used that as a pretext to say we are uprooting this forest that came from somewhere to construct a new settlement. So the JNF is kind of used as like a cudgel in order to expand settlements and further push Palestinians off their land. So that's the JNF. But I mean that's happening, inside the Green Line. And then, as I said, you have Palestinians in the occupied West Bank and in the Gaza Strip who have no recourse. And now we're seeing 200.
They're not citizens of Israel or any other country.
Right.
So they have, they don't elect the people who make the laws that govern them. Those laws, as you say, when they're enforced, that's through like military courts, rather than regular civilian courts. And I mean, I think if anybody seriously believes that that like a Palestinian who has like a member of their family who is shot by the Israeli military is going to get like recourse through an Israeli military court, I don't know what to tell you, right? I mean, that's not
right. Right. Never. No, there's no justice. And it's been set up that way deliberately, obviously.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. An issue that I wanted to make sure that we got to during this discussion, because I think this like a little bit of awareness that's trickling in, but I think it's just kind of breathtaking, is since a lot of this you might listen to and you might think, okay, well, so maybe we're talking about things that were set up in the 1940s or the 1960s, and that these haven't been rectified yet, but basically maybe things are moving in a better direction. But let's talk about an issue that only came up in 2020. In fact, really only came up in 2021, which is the COVID vaccine and how that's been distributed.
Yeah. I mean, once again, Israel, its national priority is anything but Palestinians. And so they were touted, by like Dr. Fauci, right, as like this model country that was able to vaccinate all of its people. I mean, it was a massive PR campaign that went into that. And of course, Jewish Israelis were vaccinated, but Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, I mean, right now in Gaza, as bombs are falling onto buildings and, over 200 people have been killed in the last 6 days. 58,000 people are displaced just in the, in the last 6 days. 1% of the Gaza population has been vaccinated. In the West Bank, it's not much more. And, that's what people were saying, in the last few months since the vaccines were available and Israel was deliberately withholding them from Palestinians under occupation, that it was medical apartheid. That's exactly what it is. Medical apartheid, privileging one population over another. And And so you have this situation now in Gaza. I was just talking to a friend of mine who's a doctor who works at Shifa Hospital in Gaza City regularly. That's Gaza's main trauma center. In one of the bombings today, or over the night, last night, Israeli forces bombed a building that killed the head of Shifa Hospital's COVID response unit. Right. So, and they've been bombing COVID testing centers and clinics. So you have this situation where Palestinians are completely trapped. They're enduring a 14-year siege and blockade, which means that Israel gets to allow whatever it wants or doesn't want into Gaza. It's completely crippled Gaza's economy as they don't have any way to export their goods. And along with, an exhaustive list of items that are banned from being imported into Gaza, our medicines, our basic antibiotics. My friend was talking about how there's no gauze in Gaza. And the word gauze actually comes from the etymology is that it was made in Gaza. Hundreds and hundreds of years ago, that the Gazans had come up with a special weave of cloth to help, wounds. So the irony is, it's stupefying. There's no gauze. My friend was talking about there's no tourniquets, and we were talking about this in 2018 during the Great March of Return when Palestinians were rising up and marching to the boundary, the northern and eastern boundaries with Israel, demanding the right to go back to their homeland. And Israeli snipers at the boundary were shooting indiscriminately, and there were no tourniquets, and now, so we have a situation that's been completely just collapsed because of COVID, because of the siege, because of people are still trying to rebuild the houses that were bombed in 2014, right? And now they're being bombed again. So I'm just rendered speechless by the amount of barbarity that Israel exhibits and how complicit the U.S. is right now. I mean, Biden he's trying to push through a $735 million weapons package to Israel right now so that they can reload.
Yeah, and the United States has blocked all of the attempts in the Security Council to at least get a
three times now. Right.
That's it.
Right.
Unreal. So that is, and we should talk too about what those weapons that you're talking about are being used for, like right now, like in the last few days. Forrest, do you have the clip?
Right. Yeah. That's the Shuruk Media Tower.
Oh my God.
Yeah, a 13-story building just completely wiped off the face of the skyline.
إذا أترك لك أن تعلق على ما يجري الآن. أهم من أي سؤال الصور تتحدث.
So, in these clips that you're watching, so we're talking about stuff not even just. I mean, like, Jesus, not that this would be okay, right? But we're not even talking about some sort of places where only radical Palestinian, media organizations are headquartered. We're talking about where the Associated Press, the AP is, and that's been bombed, and not by accident, not by which not that the accident excuse goes that far, even when it applies. I mean, I remember I think, Howard Zinn's old analogy about, driving, at 100 miles an hour through a alley crowded with children, and you don't intend to kill any specific child, but that really doesn't get you off the hook morally, applies. But in this case, not accidentally. I mean, the Israeli and, government and IDF, Twitter accounts, will say, yes, we knew exactly what this building was. We bombed it on purpose. And then, there are unverifiable claims about weapons, but this is like, it tells you something about how brazen it is, that this is with the world watching, with it all being sort of, it's all on video. This is all hashed out on Twitter. It's that they are still willing to bomb 13-story buildings where mainstream media organizations are headquartered.
Yeah, right. And so like when they in the last few days, of course, Israel's Twitter feed has just been boasting about these war crimes that they've been committing. And the reason that they're able to boast about it is because there have been no consequences leveled against Israel for any of the war crimes that have happened in 73 years. So Israel has the tacit, green light by Western countries, most strongly by the US and the EU, right, to obliterate Gaza. Yeah, and then like they think they're so cute, right, with their Twitter feed with all the rockets. It's absolutely despicable. It's disgusting. And Israel has the tactical weapons. They know they have the highest form of technology available to them. It's like people sitting in some office building in Tel Aviv pushing buttons, just as like soldiers here in this country sit in a war room in Las Vegas and drone people in Afghanistan. It's the same. It's a video game to them. They've so successfully dehumanized Palestinians. It doesn't matter if it's women, children, boys, men. It does not matter. If they're Palestinian, they're fair game to the Israelis.
Yeah, which is particularly astonishing because, as you say, right, it's something that there's an obvious parallel to American imperialism, but at the same time, the disanalogy is that when the American public accepts this kind of endless drone warfare in Afghanistan and Pakistan, it's stuff that's going on the other side of the world. Right. It's happening to people who they know very little about, who are like extremely vague abstractions to them. Whereas in the Israeli-Palestinian case, it's happening like to
10 miles from Tel Aviv. Like it's very, very close.
Yeah. I mean, this is like I don't even know. Like this is like it's happening. This is like somebody in Silver Lake, like sending over drones to bomb a neighborhood in Inglewood. That's right. That would be the geographic equivalent. You're talking, so you have this like level of brutality that's reminiscent of something like the American war in Vietnam, but it's happening, but it's taking place in this environment where, like that first clip that we just showed, like you have like, oh yeah, that's like the settler who comes around and like the Palestinian woman knows his name and they're yelling at each other because they know who they are. So I mean that it's a level of intensity, having it like be that personal that's particularly disturbing, that like you know that these people who you're blowing up, who you're denying basic medical care to, that which again is also just like that example. I mean, whatever you believe about any of the larger issues here, like, accept all the bullshit you want about, the amazing peace deal, the, Palestinians are off.
Don't accept that bullshit.
Right?
It's such
That's
a
like,
waste of thought. Yeah.
but like, accept whatever bullshit you want about that, and it would still be the case that any occupying power of any country under any circumstances, doesn't matter what it is, right? I mean, we could be talking about like, Germany in 1946, like any country that's being militarily occupied by anyone, the occupier has a legal and moral responsibility to like ensure that people's basic medical needs, are met, like in any circumstances, never mind during an unprecedented global pandemic.
Yeah, no kidding. And, just to kind of rub it in a little bit more, Israeli warplanes bombed, nearly all of the main road arteries in and around Gaza City, including the roads that lead to Shifa Hospital. So you'll see, if you look on my Twitter, you'll see a photo from the Palestinian human rights organization Al-Haq, where it's a crater in the road next to the hospital. So what that does, obviously, what it's meant to do is make it impossible for ambulances to come in and out and get the wounded. It makes it impossible for people which is usually what happens, is people, load injured people into their cars themselves and then drive to Shifa Hospital. Impossible to do that. So ambulances can't get in or out. Cars can't get in or out. Supply trucks can't get in or out. And this is all happening under a freaking pandemic. And COVID is still killing people in Gaza every day. There's limited, intubation machines. There's everything is limited in Gaza. And to have this on top, the decisions that medics are having to make right now about whether to let a person in front of them live or die, it's an unbearable thought. Unbearable.
Yeah. Well, I know that there's a lot of very not fun stuff packed into the last half hour, but I want to, my goal for this segment is that I don't want anybody to be able to watch or listen to this and then continue to merrily believe the sort of liberal-ish, view that like, oh well, there's what we're talking about here is a conflict, and of course it's good, but there's probably stuff on both sides, and you need to like all that stuff, right? Like I want people to have at least some realistic picture of what's going on, but we are for sure going to have you back for a longer and less intense less intense visit in the future. Nora, where can people check out your stuff?
So I'm on Twitter at Nora BF. Also, I'm an associate editor at the Electronic Intifada. We're on Twitter at Intifada and on Instagram at Electronic Intifada. I'm also a co-host of the Brief podcast, and we just put up an episode that we recorded very early this morning. You can go to thebriefpodcast.com. And we're also on Spotify and, all the iTunes, all the things. So, and the episode that we put up this morning, it's a roundtable discussion with my colleagues and comrades and our friend Tarek, who's the physician that I was mentioning, who works regularly at Shifa Hospital. So it's an essential listen.
Sounds good. All right. Yeah. Thank you, Nora.
Thank you so much, Ben.
All right, that was Nora Barrows-Friedman from the Electronic Intifada. before we bring on Julianna Forlano, want to just plug a couple things really quickly. So one is this class that I am teaching in June at online class at Renegade University, Logic and Politics, How to Make an Argument. So I wanted to make sure, well, I guess it'll be too late by the time people listen to this as a podcast, but at least people who are watching it on YouTube, that I mentioned this tonight because RU will give you an early bird discount if you sign up. Today is the last day for that. So this is something I'm looking forward to. It's going to be on the first 4 Tuesday nights in June. And it should be really good. I mean, I've been doing something somewhat similar at Michael Albert School for Social and Cultural Change for the last month and a half, and honestly, it's been really liberating because teaching outside of a traditional university setting, so nobody's worried about grades, which is an issue that you spend 3/4 of your time on in universities. It's not an issue because nobody's being graded. Nobody's taking it as a general education requirement. Nobody's taking it because they need a couple more credits for their major. You're only taking it because you're passionate about the subject. And that has been really fantastic at SSCC. And I'm really looking forward to it at Renegade University. It should be a interesting, politically mixed group of students, comrades and otherwise, but that should make for lively class discussions. So as I said, really looking forward to that. And, since this is stuff like this, right? Stuff like this podcast, stuff like writing, of course, and also stuff like this class is all I'm going to be doing now. So yeah, please do consider signing up. That'd be really good. Last thing before we bring Julianna on, do want to just quickly talk about something that came out in Jacobin yesterday, which is a preview article for my new book that is so it's called "We Can't Cancel Ourselves into a Better World." And it's been getting some interesting discussion today on Twitter. Friend of the show Jonathan Chait is upset about it because he says he thinks it's unreasonable that I'm blaming neoliberalism for cancel culture because of course
famous Kremlinologist Jonathan Chait.
Yeah. Because his line is, well, look at all these communist countries that persecuted people, and clearly it's just exactly the same thing, and there are no differences between those two situations, and God knows there are no other situations you could compare it to. So therefore, it's not neoliberalism; it's Marxism. That's the problem. So
the foundations of my belief in democratic socialism really come from the fact that I want everyone to have the job security that Jonathan Chait has. How we can just push the dumbest possible Trump has been a Russian asset since 1987 stories over and over and over again, even in 2021, and he just keeps his job. I think everybody should have that job security, and that's kind of the foundation of my my politics. I've decided.
No, that's fair. That's good. That's a good goal. Everybody should have as much job security as Jonathan Chait. By the way, I also thought, just quick shout out, just because it made me laugh, what I thought was the best Twitter response to the Jonathan Chait thing about my article was from some Matt Thomas NYC, I guess is the handle, who says, who can forget when Stalin was going to be assassinated for doing bisexual erasure to Frida Kahlo. So that's... So there you go.
He must have a getting dunked on fetish, right? Or something like that. Like just a humiliation fetish. Because I just every article I've seen by him or every Twitter response, even the snarky ones, are stupid. I don't know. I just feel like Jonathan Chait just has to have a getting repeatedly kicked in the face on Twitter fetish of some kind.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Let me just see. I think we lost Julianna. She was in the back room. And now, okay, we got her back. So, yeah. So anyway, So I guess the three big takeaways here are: one, buy the book. If we established, for earlier in the episode, one of the reasons that I want you to do that, but also because I think it's something that we need to talk about more. I don't think that we can. I don't think that we should cede this issue to bulbs as dim as Jonathan Chait. The second is be smarter than that, and the third is that we should build a world where everybody has as much job security as him. So on that note, now joined by Julianna Forlano. Thank you for coming on.
Hey Ben, how's it going?
It is pretty good. How are you?
Thanks for having me. I'm fine. You watch like the segment you just did, and you're like, I'm fine. As long as if my house isn't burning down, I'm fine.
Yeah, right. Yeah. That is a no. That's not fun. That's not fun to watch or to think about. Or frankly, I have to say, in my case, to think about some of the self-justifying bullshit I used to believe about this subject. But we're done with the houses burning down segment of the show. We hope. So want to move on to a slightly lighter note. So Julianna is somebody who we had to have on because so she's a host for Act TV. Actually, you want to tell people what you do right now?
Yeah. I produce content for Act TV. I was an in the field reporter for them when people still went out of their houses and covered like live marches and rallies and uprisings and things like that. So I was on the street for them, and I hosted a show for them, and I used to host a show in Pacifica, but now I'm on basically helping them make some content on their live. We have a whole bunch of platforms, YouTube, wherever we don't get kicked off for saying stuff that sometimes the algorithm doesn't like, but in a good way.
Yeah, good.
So that's what I've been doing now. Act TV is actually moving on to being on Apple TV and Roku, which is amazing that they let like real activist voices be on Apple TV and Roku. So I'm excited to see what happens there. So we're just kind of branching out.
Yeah, that's great. So and one thing that came out. So I know you because you interviewed me for them about my book, and well, thank you. And over during that discussion, it came out. I remember I was joking on Twitter that okay, so being interviewed by Julianna Forlano, who does left media and has also worked as a comedian and as a philosophy professor. So if this isn't a friendly interview, I'm officially incapable of convincing anybody. So I wanted to have you on and to there's some more topical stuff that we'll get your take on in the post game, but just to sort of introduce you to the viewers and listeners a little bit. So let's just kind of start with the timeline of those three career paths that I just mentioned.
Oh man. Well, it started with a philosophy degree, and then I was like every other immigrant, first generation, working class parents said be a lawyer or a doctor, and because I couldn't stand blood, I'm like, I guess lawyer. So I did the philosophy. Actually, I went to college, and I remember my first philosophy class. I took it because it checked off a whole bunch of boxes, like you were saying about. And I was like, oh my God, you can study this? This is amazing. Because I went from like public school where it's so boring for intelligent people, not to toot my own horn, but
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, so I started studying philosophy, and I just fell in love with the topic, loved it, was going to go to law school, went and took the LSAT. And as I looked around at the other people taking the LSAT, I thought I might kill myself if I had to spend the rest of my life with these people. No offense to people doing good work like the NRDC
Sure,
or
sure.
the ACLU. None of those people were apparently in my LSAT cohort. And so I was completely turned off. And I just went about my life, worked for Nader as an activist, all of that kind of stuff. And I realized, you can't really save the world because everyone in the world is crazy. So I went off and got a clinical social work degree, started working with kids in foster care, started working with adults as a psychotherapist. And I'm like, hey, this doesn't work either. I mean, I'm not discouraging anyone to like cut the cord, but I just kind of, once you know too many therapists, you know also the therapists are also crazy. So it just seemed that comedy and absurdism was a clear next step. And so I started doing that, and I did a lot of political satire. I had a show called Absurdity Today with the Young Turks. Where else was I? On Pacifica and Progressive Voices Radio for a while, doing that kind of thing. I did stand up with the folks the blessed folks at the Daily Show and Friends Show. I was one of the friends in the traveling circus there. That was fun in New York. And then I got a job teaching comedy. And as you know, Ben, I have a master's in social work, and they were like, can you teach comedy writing? I'm like, sure. And then somebody retired or had a back injury, and they said, can you teach media studies? And I said, well, I don't have a background in media studies. And they said, and I quote, just read a chapter ahead of the students. And I'm like, is this what I paid 80 grand for? Like, that somebody's just reading the book ahead of. So I imposter syndrome my way through teaching myself, giving myself a master's degree in media studies and ethics. And, I taught that for several years until maybe like 8, until I did exactly what you did. I'm like, hey, can we swear on this? I was like,
Go for it.
I was an adjunct. They don't pay you. They barely pay you. They don't give you health insurance. They don't even want to give you an office. I can't tell you how many offices. They're like, have this one. Then I walked in there. I cleaned it. I fixed it. They're like, hey, this is nice. And then they gave it to somebody else. And then they hired some guy because he had a PhD and I only had a master's degree. It was like this whole thing. And I'm like, I'm out, just like you did. So I was happy to hear your story about how you're, I suggest everyone watching definitely support Ben as he makes this transition into.
Well, I appreciate that. So what is this? I guess I have to.
That long of an answer? That was a really long. I gave you like.
No, that was perfect.
When I was 17, my mother said, "Yeah."
Yeah. And and what were you like? Were you and your mother having lunch? What were you eating? Let's gotta get.
Photos on my Facebook of my lunches for.
Okay. All right. Good. So people can check. Yeah. Yeah. So I have to admit, I've got a really vague idea, right? When you say like media studies and what was it? Media ethics? Did I hear that right?
Media ethics of the ethics of broadcast journalism was the main course I taught over and over, which I loved because I was doing media satire anyway. So I was basically like taking a comedic lens and being like, look at all this baloney, and then. With my ethics background in ethics and philosophy, it was just perfect. And then the behavioral studies with the social work, it was just, look how the media is propagandizing society was basically, and is this ethical was the questions that I would ask,
Okay. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. So what did, because I think about like media critique and like the two, so there's like the Chomsky and Herman manufacturing consent, which was like a long time ago. That was a few decades ago. And their big point about propaganda was that anything it's possible, in fact, better and more effective in some ways to do propaganda where you don't just have like one person sitting out front, like reading a script about, the glorious, general, whatever, who's leading us all to our bright future. But instead you have a vigorous debate. It's just a vigorous, thriving debate that happens within incredibly narrow boundaries.
Exactly.
So that the stuff that's like that's like the most effective way to propagandize for the stuff that's the premise that's accepted by everybody. within those boundaries is just, okay, here's all the debate you can have, and that's clearly not part of it.
I'm pretty living right in that, especially if you look at the three major news networks. Just think. I mean, the topic you covered right before this, there are certain boundaries outside of which they will not talk, and that goes for any war. It's almost like war is just like, oh, this is what we do. Of course we do. Of course this is what we do. Of course, just the idea. I've never heard the word peace on, some of these places. I've never seen.
You literally have like retired generals who come back as like whatever they call them, news consultant, contributor, or whatever those people are, to come tell you things from the perspective of the military, and often going back to the Chomsky and Herman point. Like I remember, I'm old enough that I remember the lead up to the invasion of Iraq, where the constant, I was an undergrad, but I mean that's like I actually started grad school a semester after, like I'd gotten in, and I had an assistantship and everything for the fall, Western Michigan, and then I was spending all my time organizing anti-war protests, so I failed like a genetic requirement that like any sentient being should have been able to pass, and I ended up having to start a semester late. But I remember during the lead up to the invasion of Iraq, there was like a certain way that the media was always covering debate about it. But the debate never included like, let's definitely not invade Iraq, and also let's lift the sanctions and like pay Iraq reparations for all of the suffering that's been caused, for the first Gulf War and all the sanctions. That wasn't part of that debate. The debate was like, should we invade right away, or should we like?
Yeah.
What kind, right? Exactly. What flavor, right? Should we have the right now full steam ahead war, or should we have give the weapons inspectors some time to do their thing and build up a broader coalition? And the idea that the basic goal should be something other than what it was totally off the table. So like that's one kind of media critique. But
one of the things that I always thought was interesting about that was like, and still is, and this is not my theory, and I'm blanking on who said it, but there's you probably will know once I say the three important words here, that the people they bring on, these generals turned media people, are considered very serious people. But if you bring on someone who is like a Medea Benjamin, right, or us, we're wearing t-shirts, you know what I mean? Like we're not, and we're like, well, how about we just take all of that money and actually beat those swords into plowshares? Right. They're like, we're not serious. We're not, and I'm not a babe in the woods. I'm a babe in the studio. I'm not a babe in the woods. I understand that, the world is not a happy hold hands kind right. of place. I get that. And I get that there's a place for defensiveness and protectionism, but we're like empire building, and that's a little bit different than just kind of defending yourself against an aggressor.
Yeah, no, for sure. And yeah, I mean that's exactly the sort of point that would be left out of this debate. I mean, even just sort of making a distinction, between defense, like actual defense, like somebody's about to invade you, and you stop them, and aggressive wars that are justified in some sort of circuitous roundabout defense way. So that's like the sort of Chomsky-Herman media critique. But then there's the point that Matt Taibbi makes in his book Hate Inc. Have you read this?
Yeah.
And so Hate Inc. Was whatever people make of Taibbi, it's a really good book. And he has, and in that book, he originally intended it as like an update of Chomsky and Herman. It still has an element of that. There's like an interview with Chomsky at the end. But in that book, he makes he sort of decides that like maybe the main thing that's wrong with the media right now, or certainly a big thing that's wrong with it now, isn't really that one, because like what Chomsky and Herman were describing was a media landscape that's like still basically like everybody is watching the same couple channels and see what Walter Cronkite says about Vietnam, when he's, the nightly news that night, and of course there are lots of terrible things about that we just finished talking about. But at least everybody was accessing roughly the same information. Whereas what Taibbi is describing is that there's been this collapse, not total collapse, we shouldn't exaggerate, but like a lot of collapse of traditional media. And it has the effect that the audiences are really segmented. Everybody can kind of like order their own like media diet a la carte, right? So you hear what you want to hear. And
algorithms don't help with that.
What's that?
The algorithms don't help with that. They either box or they funnel you to like the right wing. I was talking to Josh Holland today on my show. He has the podcast We've Got Issues. He's a writer for Alternate. He used to write for The Nation. As I'm looking at his latest podcast to interview him about the subject matter, under that is like, want more? We think you might be interested in Tim Pool's Poolcast. Libertarian kind of a nut guy. And, you go from like a sane human being to insanity as your next click. It's troubling.
Yeah, because what the algorithm has figured out that's the stuff that's exciting, and it'll get people to click on it instead of just logging off. And then there's a different form of the same problem that happens in traditional media organizations, because the audience is this like ridiculous fraction of what it was in the everybody tunes in to see what Walter Cronkite says about Vietnam era. And so whatever, like all of the profit incentives are just to pander to like whatever little piece of the audience you still have, and just to tell them like what they want to hear.
Exactly. Like just this most recent thing with the Liz Cheney, getting kicked out of her seat. It was like MSNBC was like, Liz Cheney kicked out of her seat. That means the Trump people are taking over the whole party, and they're going to come and eat your children. And yes, Trumpism is on the rise, but that's not the whole story. But they definitely the constant fear mongering on both sides.
Because that's the thing, right? And I understand, right? Like I understand why, like I think even some like leftists don't like hearing this, because hey, you just used the phrase both sides. A lot of people are allergic to that, combination of words. That it sounds like sort of lib, civility stuff to them. But I think that there's a core point there that you should take really seriously, because Fox's incentive is obviously to scare old people in all the ways that we know that they do. That's what they exist for, right? That it's
great at it, yeah.
But MSNBC, right now, they're actually like really in crisis, because for the last 4 years they were able to like claw back to some better ratings by constantly fear mongering about like just doing like nonstop 24/7 365 Trump Russia stuff, and because that's what their remaining audience wanted to hear. And now that he's out, like that's a problem for them, because like, okay, well shit, what do we do that's still going to get people to tune in every night, without Trump? So any way that you can sort of sneak a Trump story back in, it's like, oh, this Liz Cheney thing, look, it's the Trumpists, like what
Orange Menace is back, there's like a wave of yes, crazy stuff going on out there, but we don't have to fearmonger around it.
We don't, especially if the effect of the fearmongering, the only way to make the fearmongering work is to get the liberals who watch MSNBC to care what happens to like Liz, like Cheney, who's like Dick Cheney's daughter, who's like who's like obviously
partially responsible for the rise of fascism in our country. She has her part. But
there would be, whatever you want to call Trumpism, it wouldn't have happened, without people like Liz Cheney. You don't get Trump without, you don't get Trump without George W. Bush, and responding to, responding to 9/11, not by like saying, okay, here's like this tiny terrorist organization that committed a crime and we'll be pursuing legal remedies, but as like this is a civilizational threat. We're going to have a global war on terror. I mean, I don't think that somebody like Trump with his fear mongering about Muslims would have been nearly as effective without that atmosphere. And also, for that matter, Liz Cheney, I don't remember the percentage off the top of my head, but I mean, she voted with Trump like 90% of the time or something. Like it was
exactly. This is one time she broke with it. 92% apparently.
92%. Okay, yeah, I was lowballing it. 92% of the time she voted with Trump. So the fear mongering relies on the idea that you're going to we should care that. Like Dick Cheney's hellspawn daughter has had a falling out with this slightly different flavor of lunatics that control the GOP now. So yeah,
I think there's like a fear is so addictive, and then when you are addicted to something, even if it's an emotion, you wind up doing things that are not rational and reasonable, like buying a lot of toilet paper or, right now, whatever is happening. That's, if you check the economy, people are not making decisions. And so they're more easily led. I feel like there's a very sinister thing going on, and people look for a strong man when they are terrified. And that's why everyone was in love with Governor Cuomo, because he looked reasonable during when
he sounded like he knew what he was talking about when he gave COVID press conferences. So which is why, I mean, even now, I mean, I guess finally the sexual harassment took him down a peg, but like before that, which by the way, can't talk about that without just noting how hilarious it is that like one of their initial lines of defense for that was, "Oh, that's just Italian culture." You can't get mad about that.
I was like, "Hey, let me grab your buns." Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh man.
But that finally took it. But the fact that his actual policies as governor with COVID were criminally negligent, that he was, that he was responsible for a huge number of deaths, from COVID, barely even factored into it, because it's purely about technocratic competence, or not even technocratic competence, like the optics of technocratic competence. He sounded very sure of himself. It was very reassuring. So yeah, there's a lot more to be said about this in the post game. I want to hear a little bit more about this media ethics stuff, and also there's some more topical things that I want. I want to get your reaction to. What's that? You cut off for a second.
Like it went by in a flash.
Yeah.
Let's talk in the post about how they brought it on themselves, how the mainstream media brought the people leaving them on themselves.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that. And there are some other clips we want to get your reaction to. Forrest is also going to be joining us for the post game. Patrons should have the link to that already. So see people then. And if you are just watching this and you're not a patron, I will see you next week. Left is best.